Moonlight spilled across the Colorado plains, cold and unforgiving as a dead man's stare. In its pale illumination, a lone figure collapsed to her knees, spine arching backward like a bow about to snap. Nate clawed desperately at her temple's fingernails, leaving crimson crescents in her skin. The drumming had returned, not sounds carried on the night air, but rhythms pounding directly inside her skull, each beat like a heated blade, slicing through the soft tissue of her mind. Not again. She gasped, words strangled into near incoherence. Please, God, not again. Blood trickled from her nose and ears, each drop catching the moonlight before spattering the parched earth. The silvery light illuminated the dark trails of dried blood that had crusted on her face like war paint, mapping the nights of torment that had preceded this one. Her thin frame convulsed violently, men's clothing hanging loose on her disguised feminine form as she writhed in the dirt throat, raw from screaming into the empty night. 3 nights since her fingers had unearthed those weathered bones. 3 nights of escalating torment. 3 nights of drumming that grew louder with each moonrise, pulling her inexorably eastward towards something ancient and implacable. One skeletal figure stepped forward in her vision, adorned with faded feathers and ancient beads, its bony hand reaching for her face. When it touched her, a sensation like ice and fire combined. Nate's back arched impossibly further as blood vessels burst in her eyes, turning the whites crimson. "What do you want from me?" She screamed, voice echoing across the vast emptiness. The only response was the intensification of the merciless drumming, now synchronized perfectly with her racing heartbeat, as if some terrible force had rewired her body to beat in time with its ancient rhythm. Consciousness finally mercifully fled as she collapsed face first into the dirt body, still twitching in unconscious agony. 20 miles away in a secluded valley sheltered by rustling cottonwoods, Drumweaver bolted upright from deep sleep, her hand instinctively reaching for the ceremonial knife beside her sleeping mat. The lodge remained dark and still, yet something had torn her from slumber. A disturbance in the sacred rhythms that connected her people to their ancestors, to the land itself. At 30 summers old, she had survived what many Arapaho had not: the Sand Creek massacre that claimed half her family, the relentless encroachment of white settlers, the systematic destruction of their way of life. She slipped silently from her bed, the practiced movements of a woman who had learned vigilance through bloodshed. Outside stars wheeled above, in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles below. Drumweaver placed her bare feet deliberately against the cool earth, eyes closed, seeking the source of disruption. The ground beneath her seemed to tremble with a rhythm only she could detect, a warning, a summoning. "Grandmother," she whispered to the night, invoking the spirit of the woman who had passed the sacred drum knowledge to her before smallpox took her 5 winters past. "Guide my steps." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. In that moment, Drumweaver knew with bone-deep certainty something sacred had been disturbed, and blood would soon follow. She alone felt it, as she alone had felt the last disturbance 16 summers ago, when another sacred artifact had been stolen and destroyed, despite her desperate attempts to protect it. That failure still haunted her dreams. She would not fail again. The dawn that broke across the eastern horizon brought no peace to the Arapaho camp. 3 riders approached from the south, their features hard beneath the shadow of wide-brimmed hats, their eyes calculating as they surveyed the encampment. Warriors materialized like spirits from between lodges surrounding the newcomers before they'd crossed half the distance to the central fire. The leader removed his hat with exaggerated care, revealing a face bisected by a livid scar that twisted his mouth into a permanent sneer. "Name's Quincy," he announced, making no effort to dismount despite the bristling weapons surrounding him. "These are my associates, Marshall and Dawson. We're looking for a companion of ours gone missing." Chief Standing Bear emerged from his lodge, dignity evident in every measured step, despite his 65 winters. He studied the 3 white men with eyes that had witnessed too much treachery to be deceived by simple lies. No strangers on Arapaho land. he stated, his English deliberate but clear. Quincy's scarred face twitched with impatience. Young fella, skinny dark hair. Been acting peculiar, hearing things that ain't there, digging in dirt like a madman screaming about drums. His gaze shifted deliberately to the ceremonial drums visible outside the medicine lodge. Thought he might have wandered this way. He leaned forward in his saddle voice, dropping to a tone of false confidentiality. Between us, Chief, the boy's got a sickness in the head. Found him pawing at some old burial site, babbling nonsense. Could be dangerous to himself and others. His eyes narrowed slightly. Shame if someone innocent got hurt on account of his madness. The threat beneath the concern wasn't lost on anyone present. Quincy straightened his smile, revealing teeth yellowed by tobacco. Course, if he ain't here, we'll be on our way. Just hope he don't stumble on your sacred places in his state. Man in his condition might disturb things best left undisturbed. Standing Bear's expression remained impassive, but Drumweaver, watching from the edge of the gathering, detected a subtle tension in the set of his shoulders. The outsider's words confirmed her night visions. A desecration had occurred. Your companion is not here. Standing Bear replied, You will leave our territory now. Quincy's eyes narrowed, his hand drifting casually toward his holstered pistol. Now see here. 6 rifles are aimed at you. Drumweaver called out, clearly stepping forward. 10 arrows. If your hand touches that gun, you die first. The scarred man's gaze snapped to her surprise, quickly masked by contempt. Well, now ain't this something? An Indian woman giving orders. His hand returned to his saddle horn, but his eyes hardened. We're just concerned about our friend is all. Boy's sick in the head. Dangerous, maybe. Your concern is noted. Standing Bear replied coldly. Now go. As the 3 men reluctantly turned their horses, Quincy's gaze lingered on Drumweaver. You folks be careful, he called back. Never know what a madman might do if he stumbles on your camp. He tilted his head, the scar on his face, catching the morning light. Course, if something unfortunate were to happen to your sacred places while you're distracted by my mad friend, he laughed, a sound like boots on broken glass. Tell you what, Chief, when we're back with more men tomorrow, maybe we can discuss what it'd take to make sure nothing happens to your precious burial grounds. Everyone has a price, don't they? Even savages. His threat hung in the air as they rode away, the implications clear to all who heard. When they were beyond earshot, War Chief Running Elk spat on the ground. Thieves and liars. Did you see the horses they rode? The chestnut has Yellowbird's markings. Standing Bear nodded grimly. The sacred horses missing from the southern pasture. Drumweaver stepped forward. Chief, I must speak with you alone. The ancestors sent visions last night. A sacred site has been violated. Young Swift Eagle, a warrior of 19 summers who had only recently earned his place in council, watched the exchange with troubled eyes. When the others moved toward Standing Bear's lodge, he slipped away unnoticed, riding toward the southern boundary, where he'd encountered the white men days earlier, where they'd made him promises he was beginning to regret. They swore no one would be harmed, he whispered to himself as he rode. They swore the drum would be studied and returned. But Quincy's words today had revealed his true intentions: threats, extortion, violence. Swift Eagle's stomach churned with the knowledge that he had betrayed his people for lies wrapped in gold coins. Miles away, Nate awoke to the copper taste of blood in her mouth and the relentless sun beating down on her exposed face. The drums had receded to a distant thunder during daylight hours present, but bearable enough to think to remember. Fragments of the previous days assembled themselves in her pounding head, the campsite near what Dawson had called Injun territory. His midnight return with 3 magnificent painted horses, her accidental discovery of bones while digging a fire pit, the instant invasion of drumming in her mind, her companion's swift abandonment. Sick in the head, boys gone mad. Quincy had said not to her, but about her speaking over her writhing form to Marshall and Dawson. Best we clear out before he brings trouble down on us all. Then, quieter, thinking she couldn't hear through her pain. Perfect distraction. Let the savages focus on the grave robber while we secure the real prize. Harrison will double our payment once we tell him where the artifact is buried. And once we have the drum, we'll take care of the whole damn tribe can't leave witnesses to what we're about to unleash. They'd left her to the madness, to the relentless drumming, to whatever vengeful spirits she'd awakened. Not just abandoned her, but deliberately positioned her as a scapegoat for something far bigger than horse theft. Something that threatened an entire people. Nate struggled to her feet, the world tilting sideways before reluctantly stabilizing. She needed water food. The drumming guided her eastward, though she resisted each step toward the rising sun, increasing its intensity. Fighting against invisible currents pulling her forward, Nate turned deliberately westward, away from the pulsing rhythm in her skull. 3 steps later, pain exploded behind her eyes, dropping her to her knees. A vision seared through her consciousness, the skeletal figure again this time, pointing eastward with terrible purpose. Its jaw opening impossibly wide in a silent scream that somehow merged with her own. But this time, something new appeared in the vision. A circular object, ancient and powerful its surface, covered with symbols that seemed to writhe and pulse with their own life. And beyond it, a flowing spring, its waters running blood red with the reflection of flames that consumed an entire village. Fine, she gasped when the vision released her. East it is. But you owe me answers, whatever you are. And if innocent people are in danger because of what I've done. She left the thought unfinished, forcing herself to her feet once more and turning eastward, following the relentless pull of the phantom drums. Drumweaver approached the sacred burial mound alone, as tradition demanded. Her stomach tightened at what she found disturbed earth near the eastern edge, weathered bone, exposed to open air. But it was worse than she'd feared. The violation was not random. The digging had been precise, targeted, as if the desecrator knew exactly what they sought. She knelt beside the disturbed site, murmuring ancient prayers of apology to the ancestors. The bones visible in the dirt belonged to High Hawk, the tribe's most powerful medicine man from 3 generations past. Legend held that High Hawk had been buried with the most sacred artifact the tribe possessed, the spirit drum, crafted from materials that existed before human memory, and said to hold power over the very elements themselves. But there was something the legends rarely mentioned, a secret known only to the line of drum keepers. If used improperly, the spirit drum could unleash destruction beyond imagining. Its power was meant to maintain balance, not to dominate or destroy. In the wrong hands with the wrong intentions, it could become a weapon that would consume user and target alike. The soft scuff of a footstep on stone made her whirl knife appearing in her hand with practiced speed. 20 paces away stood a figure that momentarily confused her hunter's instincts, dressed as a white man, but clearly feminine, despite the disguise, with a face gaunt from exhaustion and smeared with dried blood from nose, ears, and eyes. But it was the eyes themselves that truly captured Drumweaver's attention. Wild, haunted eyes with blood-red streaks in the whites, holding both terror and a strange, reluctant recognition. "You," the stranger whispered, voice cracking. "You feel them too. The drums." Drumweaver didn't lower her knife. "I hear nothing. I feel the disturbance you have caused, grave robber." "I'm not," the young woman began, and then doubled over as another wave of pain visibly crashed through her. "They won't stop," she moaned, fingers digging into her temples. "Day and night, louder when I face east, louder still when I reach this place." Her bloodshot eyes raised to Drumweaver's face. "Kill me if you must, but make them stop first." And she hesitated, confusion crossing her features. "Tell me why I keep seeing a circular object with strange markings. A drum, but not like any I've seen before. And water a spring turning red with blood." Drumweaver's breath caught. This white woman had never seen the spirit drum. It had been buried with High Hawk long before any white settlers reached their territory. Yet she described it perfectly. And the sacred spring that ran beneath the burial mound, known only to the tribe's spiritual leaders. "Who are you?" she demanded. The girl straightened, partially fighting visible pain. "Nate." "Well, Natalie Harrington. Nobody's used my full name in a long time." Her bloodied hand gestured weakly at her masculine attire. "Easier to travel this way. Safer. Why did you disturb our sacred burial ground?" "I didn't know what it was." Nate's voice dropped to a whisper. "I was making a fire pit. It was dark. But the men I was traveling with, I think they knew. I think they planned it. I heard them mention someone named Harrison and an artifact they were looking for. And something worse, they plan to take care of your entire tribe once they have what they want." Drumweaver's blood ran cold. "Harrison Ezekiel Harrison, the collector of native artifacts." Nate shrugged weakly. "I don't know. They just said Harrison would double their payment once they showed him where to find what they were looking for. The spirit drum." Drumweaver whispered almost to herself. "They seek the burial place of the spirit drum." "The what?" "An artifact of immeasurable power, buried with our greatest medicine man. If it fell into the wrong hands." She didn't finish the thought, her mind racing ahead to implications too terrible to voice. "The spirits are using you, punishing you for the disturbance, yes, but also trying to warn us through you." The connection between them was broken by the distant sound of approaching horses. "The three who came searching for their mad companion?" Nate asked, head snapping up. "They came this morning, speaking of a sick friend, hearing drums." Drumweaver studied the white woman's reaction carefully. "They rode horses stolen from our sacred herd." Understanding dawned in Nate's pain-glazed eyes. "The painted horses Dawson brought to camp. They weren't wandering free like he claimed." Her face hardened. "They used me. Set me up to take the blame while they escaped with their real prize. But they're coming back, aren't they, for this drum thing you mentioned? And they mean to kill your people once they have it. We must return to the camp, now." Drumweaver's voice brooked no argument. "The chief must hear of this." The Arapaho camp erupted into chaos when Drumweaver returned with Nate, walking unsteadily beside her horse. Warriors reached for weapons, women pulled children behind them, elders cried out in alarm and outrage. Standing, Bear emerged from his lodge face, darkening at the sight of the blood-streaked white woman in their midst. "You bring a desecrator among us," he demanded in their language. Drumweaver met his gaze steadily. "I bring one touched by the ancestors. The spirit of High Hawk speaks through her, and she brings warning the white men know of the spirit drum. They seek to claim it and destroy our people afterward." A collective gasp rippled through the gathered tribe. The spirit drum was rarely spoken of, even among their own people, its existence more legend than history to the younger generations. War Chief Running Elk pushed forward, hand on his knife hilt. "Madness speaks through her, the same madness her thieving companions described." He spat at Nate's feet. "They violate our burial grounds, steal our sacred horses, then send this woman in disguise to distract us with tales of spirits while they escape." Swift Eagle stood at the edge of the gathering, his young face troubled. He alone knew the truth, that he had been the one to tell Quincy about the burial mound, about the legend of a powerful artifact buried there. Not out of malice, but out of youthful naivety, believing the white man's promises, that he sought only knowledge, that the tribe would be compensated, that no desecration would occur. Now he saw the consequences of his trust unfolding before him, and fear kept him silent. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered tribe. Nate, understanding none of the words, but reading the hostility clearly enough, swayed on her feet as another wave of drumming intensified inside her skull. The spirits chose her. Drumweaver insisted switching to English so Nate could understand. Why would they speak through one unworthy? Because they mean to punish her. Running Elk countered fiercely. As we should. Standing Bear raised a hand for silence. What proof do you offer of this claim that spirits speak through her? Before Drumweaver could answer, Nate collapsed to her knees, body arching unnaturally as seizure took hold. This time, the words that tore from her throat were clear, despite her never having learned the language. The sacred drum wakes from slumber. The circle must not be broken. White man comes with fire sticks to tear open the earth womb. The blood of the betrayer mingles with the blood of the innocent. High Hawk sees through borrowed eyes. The water beneath the stone speaks to bone. The bone speaks to drum. The drum speaks to sky. The destroyer comes with false smile and scholar's hands. He knows the true power. He seeks not knowledge, but destruction. Listen, or all will be lost. The Arapaho drew back in shock and fear as ancient prophecies poured from the white woman's lips. When the fit finally passed, Nate slumped forward, blood streaming afresh from her nose, unconscious but breathing. Medicine Woman, oldest of the tribe's healers, stepped forward with eyes wide. This cannot be. The prophecy of the returning drum has not been spoken aloud since my grandmother's time, yet she speaks it. Drumweaver said quietly. A white woman who has never heard our language. Standing Bear's weathered face showed the weight of his position. Even if the spirits speak through her, our law is clear. Disturbance of sacred burials by outsiders is punishable by death. Nate stirred, regaining consciousness just as her words were translated. Then do what you must, she whispered, struggling to sit up despite the pain. Anything is better than this suffering. Her eyes locked with the chief's, a trace of blood still at the corner of her mouth. But understand this. I wasn't with those men. They left me behind, used me as a scapegoat while they planned something far worse. If I must pay the price, so be it. But please, protect your people. Don't let them fall into the same trap. The unexpected response silenced the angry murmurs. Suicide by enemy was not the way of cowards or deceivers. And the warning in her words carried the ring of truth. The tense moment shattered as a young warrior rode hard into camp, leaping from his horse before it fully stopped. Riders approaching from the south, he reported breathlessly. Many riders, white men with guns, and they have brought strange machines, metal tubes on wheels that breathe fire, and boxes that smell of the thunder powder. Mr. Brop beaks dows no. Standing Bear's expression hardened. How many? 30, maybe more, armed with rifles and what looks like mining equipment. And he hesitated. They have Swift Eagle with them. All eyes turned to where the young warrior had been standing moments before, only to find him gone. The betrayal was confirmed in his absence. The camp erupted into frantic activity, warriors rushing for weapons, women gathering children, elders being escorted to hiding places. In the confusion, Drumweaver pulled Nate to her feet. Come, she ordered. Now we learn if you speak truth or lies. What's happening? Nate gasped, struggling to keep up, as Drumweaver led her toward a small lodge set apart from the others. The men who abandoned you have returned with reinforcements and weapons of destruction. Drumweaver's eyes flashed with anger. Just as you or the spirit speaking through you foresaw. They seek the spirit drum, and they have one of our own helping them. Swift Eagle, Nate murmured, the one who disappeared. A young warrior barely proven. He must have told them about the spirit drum's burial place. Drumweaver's voice held both anger and a deeper pain, the wound of betrayal from within. Now they come to claim it, and they will destroy anyone in their path. Our people are sacred grounds, all for an artifact they cannot possibly understand. She paused, her face darkening with memory. 16 summers ago, I failed to protect another sacred object the healing staff of First Woman. It was stolen while under my guard, sold to collectors, then destroyed when its new owners could not make it obey their commands. I will not fail again, not with the spirit drum which holds power 1,000 times greater. Outside, they could hear approaching hoofbeats, the shouts of men, the ominous metallic clanking of heavy equipment being transported. What is this spirit drum? Nate asked, heart pounding in time with the phantom beats that had never fully left her head. Why is it so important? Drumweaver moved quickly around the small lodge, gathering ceremonial items, tobacco eagle feathers, sacred herbs, and a small handheld drum decorated with symbols similar to those Nate had seen in her visions. It is the oldest possession of our people, created before memory by the first drum keeper. It is said to hold power over the elements themselves, earth, wind, water, fire. In the right hands, it brings balance and healing. In the wrong hands. She met Nate's gaze directly. Destruction beyond imagining. The white man Harrison knows this, not the full truth, but enough to believe he can harness its destructive potential. And they're coming for it now. Nate's voice had steadied the relentless pain in her head, giving way to clarity of purpose. What will happen? Drumweaver's dark eyes held no comfort. Now we will see blood spilled on both sides, unless... She paused, studying Nate with new intensity. Unless the spirits who speak through you have brought you here for a greater purpose than we yet understand. The confrontation unfolded in the central clearing of the Arapaho camp. The White Riders had formed a semicircle just outside effective arrow range rifles braced across saddles. At their center stood Quincy, now dressed in an expensive suit that couldn't disguise his predatory nature, flanked by Marshall and Dawson. Behind them waited 3 wagons bearing ominous machinery, crude drilling equipment, and what appeared to be early dynamite charges. Most alarming of all was the Gatling gun, mounted on the central wagon, a deadly new weapon capable of firing multiple rounds with devastating speed. Beside Quincy sat a heavy-set man in an elaborate coat, his pale skin reddened by sun exposure, a gold watch chain stretched across his substantial belly. Ezekiel Harrison, collector of native artifacts, and self-proclaimed anthropologist whose museum in Denver displayed sacred objects stolen from tribes across the West. "We've come for what's rightfully ours," Quincy shouted. Government surveyor confirmed it, valuable mineral deposits on unclaimed territory. Standing Bear faced them astride his war horse every inch, the leader despite being outnumbered and outgunned. This land was guaranteed to us by treaty. The burial ground of our ancestors is sacred and protected. Harrison leaned forward, his cultured Eastern accent contrasting sharply with Quincy's frontier drawl. "My dear Chief, let's not play games. We both know what lies beneath that burial mound, and it's not just your ancestors' bones. The spirit drum of the Arapaho is an artifact of historical significance that belongs in a proper museum, not buried in the dirt. Hand it over, and we'll compensate you generously." Swift Eagle sat uncomfortably on a horse between the white men, his eyes downcast, unable to meet the accusatory stares of his people. Standing Bear's expression remained impassive. "The sacred drum is not for sale or trade. It stays with our ancestors, as it has for generations." Quincy spat on the ground. "Treaties get rewritten all the time, Chief. Progress can't be stopped for a pile of old bones and superstitions." His hand rested casually on his rifle. "Now we know you're holding a white citizen against their will," the young man who was traveling with us. "Hand him over along with that drum, and maybe we can discuss terms like civilized folks." Harrison smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. "And if you're concerned about your young friend here," he gestured toward Swift Eagle, "rest assured he's been most helpful. Told us everything about the burial layout, the protections, the legends." The way he said the last word dripped with condescension. "I never meant for this." Swift Eagle suddenly blurted, his young voice cracking with emotion. "They promised no one would be hurt. They said they only wanted to study the drum to preserve its... Quiet, boy. Quincy snapped hand, moving to his pistol. You've been paid. Your part is done. But Swift Eagle turned his horse toward his people, desperation in his eyes. Chief, they have weapons I've never seen before. They plan to kill everyone, men, women, children. I heard them talking when they thought I was asleep. Harrison doesn't want the drum for a museum. He wants its power. He believes he can control it, use it to... The crack of a rifle split the air. Swift Eagle jerked in his saddle, a bloom of crimson spreading across his chest. His eyes widened in shock and pain as he toppled slowly from his horse body, striking the ground with terrible finality. Enough talk, Quincy said coldly, lowering the smoking rifle. Get the dynamite in position. Anyone moves against you, put 'em down. Swift Eagle's body twitched in the dirt, life draining from him as his people watched in horror. With his last strength, he raised his head, blood bubbling from his lips as he called out. Forgive me, I never knew. The spring beneath the mound. They want to poison the waters, destroy everything. The killing of Swift Eagle shattered any pretense of negotiation. War cries erupted from the Arapaho warriors as arrows flew toward the white intruders. Gunfire answered immediately, the superior firepower of the rifles cutting down the first wave of defenders. Women and children fled toward the safety of the nearby hills as the battle erupted in full force. Harrison's voice rose above the chaos. Secure the burial mound, I want that drum intact. Inside the medicine lodge, Nate bolted upright at the sound of gunfire. They're killing everyone. Drumweaver grabbed her arm. We must reach the burial mound before they destroy it. If the spirit drum is taken or destroyed, more than just our tribe will suffer. How they'll shoot us the moment we step outside. There is another way. Drumweaver moved to the back of the lodge, pulling aside a covering to reveal a narrow tunnel. This leads to the sacred spring that flows near the burial mound. Our ancestors built such escape routes in times of danger. They crawled through the cramped passage, emerging 5 minutes later beside a small, crystal-clear spring that wound its way through a stand of cottonwoods. In the distance, they could hear the battle-raging gunfire, screams, war cries. The smell of smoke filled the air as the first lodges caught fire. Above it all, the mechanical clatter of the Gatling gun sent shivers down Nate's spine. Hurry, Drumweaver urged, leading the way along the stream bank toward the burial mound, which lay half a mile distant. They will send men to secure the drum while the others keep our warriors occupied. The spring's path took them closer to the battlefield than was safe, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees through tall grass to avoid being spotted. Nate's heart hammered against her ribs as bullets whistled overhead. Through gaps in the grass, she could see the Arapaho warriors falling in disturbing numbers, outmatched by the superior weapons of their attackers. Your people are dying, she whispered hoarsely to Drumweaver. Can't the spirit drum help them? Only in the hands of one who knows how to use it, came the tense reply. And even then, its power is not meant for war. It maintains balance. It does not create advantage. They had covered half the distance to the burial mound when an explosion rocked the ground beneath them. Looking up, they saw with horror that the attackers had set charges along one side of the sacred mound, blasting away earth to create easier access to its depths. No. Drumweaver's anguished cry was lost in the sounds of battle. Another figure appeared on the horizon, Harrison himself riding hard toward the burial mound, accompanied by 4 armed men. They would reach it long before Nate and Drumweaver could. We'll never make it in time. Nate gasped. But even as she spoke, something shifted inside her mind, and the relentless drumming that had tortured her for days suddenly coalesced into a clear, purposeful rhythm. Without conscious thought, she pressed her hand against the flowing spring beside them. To her amazement, the water responded to her touch, churning and changing direction to flow directly toward the damaged burial mound. The water speaks to bone. she whispered, recalling the prophecy that had flowed through her earlier. I think I can help us get there faster. Drumweaver stared in shock as the spring waters surged upward, forming an unlikely tunnel that hugged the ground. How are you doing this? I'm not. Nate replied, trembling with the effort of maintaining a connection she didn't understand. Highhawk is. Through me. Quickly, the water will shield us from view. They crawled into the impossible tunnel of flowing water, a space that should have drowned them, but instead encased them in a protective bubble as they moved swiftly along the stream bed. Through the watery walls, the world appeared distorted, but visible, allowing them to navigate directly toward the burial mound under the perfect camouflage of the spring's flow. When they emerged at the base of the mound, they found themselves behind Harrison's men, who were already digging frantically at the explosion site. The collector himself stood nearby, consulting an ancient-looking map while issuing orders. Careful with those shovels, you idiots. The drum must not be damaged. He pointed to a specific spot. According to the old document I acquired, the artifact should be right there beneath that layer of rock. Drumweaver pulled Nate behind a boulder. We need a distraction, she whispered. Something to draw them away long enough for us to reach the drum first. Nate closed her eyes, reaching again for the strange connection that had allowed her to manipulate the spring water. The drumming in her head increased, guiding her movements, as she placed her hand once more in the flowing stream. This time the water shot upward in a powerful geyser, dousing Harrison and his men in a sudden, inexplicable deluge. What in God's name? Harrison spluttered, staggering backward. In the momentary confusion, Drumweaver darted forward, Nate close behind. They reached the excavation site and slid into the pit, just as one of Harrison's men spotted them. Hey, stop right there. Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off stone inches from their heads. Drumweaver worked frantically, her hands digging where Swift Eagle's dying words had indicated not at the spot Harrison was focusing on, but 3 feet to the left, where a particular configuration of stones marked the true resting place of the spirit drum. They're going to kill us. Nate gasped as more bullets struck nearby, showering them with stone fragments. Keep digging. Drumweaver commanded, hands bleeding from the effort. The ancestors guide our path, even if it leads to death. Harrison's voice rose above the gunfire. Hold your fire, you fools. You might hit the drum. Take them alive. I want to know how they found the true location. The momentary ceasefire gave them precious seconds. Drumweaver's fingers finally struck something solid, not stone or bone, but a surface that seemed to pulse with its own life force. Here, together, they scraped away the remaining earth, revealing an object wrapped in ancient hides. Even before it was fully uncovered, Nate could feel its power resonating with the drumming in her head and the 2 rhythms aligning with perfect synchronicity. For the first time in days, the pain receded, replaced by a clarity that felt almost supernatural. Harrison's men reached the edge of the pit, weapons trained on them. Don't move, one shouted. Step away from that object. Harrison himself appeared behind them, his scholarly facade stripped away to reveal naked avarice. At last, he breathed, eyes fixed on the partially unwrapped bundle. The spirit drum. Do you have any idea how long I've searched for it? How many inferior artifacts I've cataloged while seeking this one true source of power? You don't understand what you're dealing with. Drumweaver set her body positioned protectively in front of the ancient artifact. The spirit drum is not meant for outsiders. Its power cannot be controlled by those who don't understand its nature. Harrison laughed, the sound chilling in its confidence. My dear savage, I understand its nature far better than you might think. I've spent 20 years studying ancient power objects from tribes across the continent. The Lakota spirit lance, the Navajo wind flute, the Cheyenne earth bowl, all disappointments, pale shadows of their legends. His eyes gleamed with fanatical intensity. But this This is the true source. The one artifact that actually works as the legends claim. How would you know? Nate challenged, buying time as Drumweaver continued to carefully extract the wrapped bundle from its earthen bed. You've never seen it used, haven't I? Harrison's smile widened. 16 years ago, I witnessed a demonstration of an artifact, much like this one, the healing staff, I believe it was called. Remarkable power, but limited in scope. It belonged to your tribe, did it not? He glanced at Drumweaver, whose face had gone rigid with suppressed emotion. Before it was unfortunately destroyed during testing. You. Drumweaver whispered, recognition dawning. You were the collector who bought the healing staff from the thieves. You broke it trying to force its power. A regrettable scientific failure. Harrison shrugged. But it taught me much about how such objects respond to different stimuli. He gestured to his men. Enough talk. Bring them out and the drum with them. Rough hands seized Nate and Drumweaver, dragging them from the pit. The spirit drum, still partially wrapped in its ancient coverings, was handed reverently to Harrison, who cradled it with incongruous tenderness. Magnificent, he murmured carefully, removing the outer layer of hides to reveal an object unlike anything Nate had ever seen. Roughly the size of a large cooking pot, the spirit drum's frame appeared to be made of some strange, iridescent material that wasn't quite wood or stone. Its surface covered with symbols that seemed to shift and change as she watched. The drumhead itself was stretched from a hide so pale it was almost translucent, revealing shadowy patterns beneath its surface that moved like living things. Do you know why they call it the spirit drum? Harrison asked conversationally as the battle continued to rage around them, seemingly oblivious to the death and destruction. Not because it channels spirits as these primitives believe, but because it contains them. He tapped the surface gently, producing a sound like distant thunder. Spirits bound into physical form through a process your simple minds would call magic, but which is merely undiscovered science. Spirits that respond to the right commands. In the distance, the Gatling gun had fallen silent, either out of ammunition or because there were no more targets worthy of its deadly attention. The Arapaho warriors had been driven back to the edge of their camp, many lying motionless on the blood-soaked earth. Standing Bear himself had been wounded, his left arm hanging useless at his side as he rallied his remaining fighters for a last desperate stand. Your people are nearly finished, Harrison observed dispassionately. Just as well. No witnesses to what comes next. He turned to Quincy, who had ridden up to join them, his scarred face flushed with the thrill of easy victory. Is everything prepared? Charges set around the spring source just like you ordered. Quincy confirmed, dismounting. Once we're clear, one big boom, and the whole water table gets the special treatment. He patted a canvas bag slung across his saddle, a bag that clinked with the sound of glass vials. Though I still don't see why we need poison. We've pretty much won already. Insurance, Harrison replied smoothly. This tribe has proven troublesome before. Better to eliminate the problem at its root. Poisoning their water source ensures no survivors to cause difficulties later. Besides, we need to test the drum's full capabilities in an extreme situation. Nate's blood ran cold as she finally understood the full scope of Harrison's plan. Not just theft of a sacred artifact, not just defeat of the Arapaho warriors, but complete genocide. Men, women, children, all eliminated through poisoned water that would linger in the soil for years. You're insane, she breathed, struggling against the grip of her captor. They're human beings. Harrison regarded her with mild curiosity. Obstacles to progress, nothing more. Their time has passed. But you're something of an enigma. How does a white woman end up defending savages? And more intriguingly, how did you know where to find the drum when my own carefully researched maps were wrong? The spirits guided her. Drumweaver answered before Nate could speak. As they have guided drumkeepers since time began. Spirits. Harrison scoffed. Primitive superstition. There's a rational explanation for everything, including your friend's unusual sensitivity. Perhaps something in her bloodline, some inherited trait that resonates with the artifact's frequency. He studied Nate's face with sudden intensity. Those eyes. Unusual coloring. Where did you say you were from, Miss Harrington? Nate supplied, meeting his gaze defiantly. And I didn't say. A flash of recognition crossed Harrison's face. Harrington. Not related to Thomas Harrington of Boston by any chance. The merchant who married that peculiar Indian woman some 60 years ago, the one with the remarkable blue eyes. Nate's heart skipped a beat. Her father had rarely spoken of his own parents, and never with any detail or affection. I wouldn't know, she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. Harrison laughed softly. Oh, this is delicious. The lost bloodline returns to its source. Sky Eye's descendant drawn back to her people by forces she doesn't understand. He shook his head in wonderment. If I believed in destiny, this would be a remarkable example. Drumweaver's expression changed at the mention of Sky Eyes, a name clearly significant to her. Sky Eyes was taken during a raid 2 generations ago, she said slowly. She had the gift of spirit walking. It was said her children would return when the tribe faced its greatest danger. Charming legend, Harrison sneered, but irrelevant to our current business. He turned the spirit drum in his hands, examining it from all angles. Now, according to my research, the drum must be played at the sacred spring source to achieve maximum effect. Something about resonance with the flowing water amplifying its power. He nodded to his men. Bring them. I want witnesses to this historic moment. They were marched at gunpoint toward the spring source, a circular pool of crystal-clear water nestled in a small clearing 50 yards from the burial mound. The natural basin was surrounded by ancient stones carved with the same shifting symbols that adorned the spirit drum. Around its perimeter, Quincy's men had placed dynamite charges and the ominous canvas bag of poison. The sounds of battle had diminished to sporadic gunfire. Through the trees, Nate could see the Arapaho camp in flames, or the surviving warriors gathered in a tight defensive circle around the remaining women and children. Their situation was clearly hopeless, outnumbered, outgunned, with no path of escape. Perfect, Harrison murmured, positioning himself at the edge of the spring. Now, we'll see if the legends are true. He placed the spirit drum directly on the surface of the pool where it floated impossibly, as if the water had suddenly developed the consistency of solid ground beneath it. The drum's symbols flared to life, glowing with an eerie blue light that reflected in the spring water, transforming it into a mirror of the night sky. According to the text I recovered. Harrison continued, clearly enjoying his moment of triumph. The drum speaks to the sky when struck 3 times by a worthy hand. I don't do this, Drumweaver urged, desperation evident in her voice. The spirit drum chooses who may use it. If you are not chosen, the consequences. Silence her, Harrison ordered, and one of his men struck Drumweaver across the face, sending her to her knees. Nate struggled against her captor's grip, fury rising within her. You have no idea what forces you're playing with. On the contrary, Harrison replied, poising his hand above the drum's surface. I've spent my life studying these forces. Now I will master them. With theatrical deliberation, he struck the ancient drumhead 3 times with his open palm. The sound that emerged was not the expected resonant boom, but a thin, sickly thump, like flesh striking dead wood. For a moment, Nothing happened. Harrison's face twisted with disappointment. Then the sky darkened, not gradually, but all at once, as if a veil had been drawn across the sun. The temperature plummeted. Wind arose from nowhere, whipping across the clearing with increasing fury. The earth beneath their feet began to tremble. Harrison's expression shifted from disappointment to triumph. You see, it responds. It works. No. Drumweaver said, genuine fear in her voice for the first time. It punishes. You have awakened its defensive power without the knowledge to direct it. She turned to Nate, gripping her shoulders. The prophecy, you must complete it. You are the vessel High Hawk has chosen. I don't know how. Nate cried over the rising wind, which had now reached gale force, tearing at their clothing and hair. Your blood, the blood of Sky Eyes returned, must mingle with the blood of the betrayer. Swift Eagle's blood on the earth, yours on the drum. Drumweaver pressed her ceremonial knife into Nate's hand. It is the only way to restore balance. The wind had reached hurricane strength, now tearing branches from trees and flinging them through the air like deadly projectiles. The water in the sacred spring began to churn and rise, forming impossible shapes that twisted upward toward the darkened sky. The ground split beneath them, jagged cracks spreading outward from the spring in all directions. Harrison staggered back from the drum, his triumph turning to horror as he realized the forces he had unleashed were beyond his control. What's happening? He shouted to Quincy. This isn't what the text described. You fool. Drumweaver called over the howling gale. The text you stole was incomplete by design. Our ancestors knew thieves would come, so they recorded only half the ritual, the part that awakens the drum's power, but not the part that directs it. One of the fissures widened directly beneath the men holding Nate and Drumweaver, sending them tumbling in different directions as they fought to keep their footing. Suddenly free, Nate struggled against the wind toward the floating drum and the ceremonial knife clutched in her white-knuckled grip. Shoot her! Harrison screamed, but his men could barely stand in the tempest, let alone aim effectively. A stray bullet grazed Nate's arm, the sharp pain barely registering through her desperate focus on reaching the drum. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape the unnatural storm. But the phantom drumming in her head, now synchronized perfectly with the visible pulsing of the spirit drum, pulled her forward step by agonizing step. Harrison himself lunged for her, his face contorted with rage. The drum is mine. I earned it, 20 years of research of sacrifice. It belongs to no one. Nate shouted back, ducking under his grasping hands. It's not a possession, it's a responsibility. With a final desperate lunge, she reached the edge of the spring. The spirit drum continued to float on its surface symbols, glowing brighter as the chaos intensified around them. Trees were being uprooted, the dynamite charges sliding across the ground as fissures opened wider in all directions. Quincy and his remaining men had abandoned all pretense of control, fleeing toward their horses in blind panic. But Harrison remained, his obsession stronger than his survival instinct. Give me the drum, he demanded, grappling with Nate at the spring's edge. It's destroying everything. Your actions are destroying everything. Nate shot back, struggling to break free of his grip. Let go before it's too late. For an instant, doubt flickered across Harrison's face. The storm had intensified beyond anything natural, lightning striking repeatedly around them. Wind strong enough to tear young trees from the earth, the ground beneath them, splitting into ever-widening chasms. It was never supposed to be like this, he shouted over the howling gale. The texts said it controlled the elements, not unleashed them. Because it was never yours to command. Nate wrenched away from him and plunged her hand into the churning spring fingers, brushing the ancient surface of the spirit drum. The moment of contact sent a shock wave through her entire body. Memories not her own, flooding her consciousness, generations of drum keepers, the sacred rituals, the careful balance maintained between power and restraint. In a flash of clarity, she realized what had to be done. She reached toward the ancient drum and carefully completed the ritual with a solemn gesture, allowing the sacred water to respond. "Let it be accepted," she whispered. Drumweaver appeared beside her, clutching a piece of cloth soaked with swift eagle's blood. "And blood of the betrayer," she added, pressing it against the drumhead beside Nate's bleeding hand. The effect was instantaneous. Spirit drum emitted a single pure tone that seemed to vibrate through their bones, through the earth itself, cutting through the chaos of the storm like a blade of clarity. Min Harrison lunged for the drum again, his face twisted with desperation. "I won't let you ruin everything." But it was too late. The wild wind stilled not gradually, but all at once, as if a door had been closed on them. The ground ceased its violent trembling. The unnatural darkness lifted sunlight, streaming once more across the desecrated burial mound. In the sudden silence, Nate could hear only her own ragged breathing, and the steady rhythmic pulse of the drum against her palms, no longer painful or invasive, but harmonious, like finding the missing heartbeat to complete her own. "It's speaking to me," she whispered in awe. "Not in words, but in rhythms, in patterns I somehow understand." But their moment of connection was shattered as Harrison, maddened by the loss of his prize, drew a pistol from his coat. "If I can't have it, no one will," he snarled, aiming not at Nate, but at the spirit drum itself. Nate moved without thinking, placing herself between the gun and the ancient artifact. "You'll have to shoot me first," she declared, voice steady despite her racing heart. "Gladly." Harrison spat, finger tightening on the trigger. A blur of motion from the side drumweaver, launching herself at Harrison with her ceremonial knife raised. The gun discharged the bullet, whistling past Nate's ear as Harrison staggered under drumweaver's attack. They grappled briefly before toppling together into one of the fissures that had not yet closed, disappearing from sight as the earth rumbled once more. "Drumweaver!" Nate cried, rushing to the edge of the chasm. But it had already begun to seal itself, the spirit drum's restorative power, healing the wounds in the earth as it had stilled the chaotic winds. Behind her, the sacred spring's surface had calmed, returning to its crystal clarity. The spirit drum continued to float upon it, but its glow had dimmed to a subtle luminescence, its power contained once more. Nate knelt at the spring's edge, overwhelmed by grief and a strange sense of completion. Drumweaver was gone, sacrificing herself to save both Nate and the drum. Harrison, too, had disappeared, his obsession carrying him literally to the depths. And all around the aftermath of battle, stretched in every direction, the burning Arapaho camp, the bodies of fallen warriors, the distant figures of Quincy and his surviving men fleeing toward the horizon. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. Standing Bear rode toward her, his wounded arm bound crudely to his side, his aging face etched with the sorrow of defeat. Behind him came the remaining Arapaho warriors, a pitiful handful compared to their numbers before the attack. The chief's eyes widened at the sight of the spirit drum floating peacefully on the spring's surface. "The sacred artifact," he breathed. "You have recovered it, at great cost," Nate replied, rising shakily to her feet. Drumweaver gave her life to protect it. Standing Bear closed his eyes briefly in acknowledgement of the sacrifice. "And the white men, their leader is gone. The others have fled." Nate looked toward the horizon where dust marked the retreating invaders. "But they may return with more men. We have little strength left to resist them," the chief admitted heavily. "Many warriors have fallen. Our homes burn. The children and elders who escaped into the hills may survive, but the Arapaho as a people." He left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. Nate turned back to the spirit drum, its rhythms still pulsing gently in her consciousness. Something within her had changed during those moments of connection. A certainty, a purpose, a belonging she had never known in her 22 years of life. "There may be another way," she said softly, reaching out to touch the drum's surface once more. As her fingers made contact, visions flowed into her mind, not chaotic and painful as before, but clear and purposeful. She saw paths opening before them, possibilities that had not existed moments before. The drum speaks to you. Standing Bear observed his tone a mixture of awe and wariness. Yes. Nate lifted her face to meet his gaze, unaware that her eyes had changed, the blue irises now ringed with amber, a physical manifestation of her connection to the spirit world. It shows me how to save your people. The chief studied her changed eyes with growing understanding. The mark of the spirit chosen, just as the ancient ones foretold. He dismounted, stiffly approaching her with careful respect. What do you see, drum speaker? A hidden valley 3 days' journey west. Water game shelter from winter storms. A place your enemies will not find. Nate's voice took on a cadence not quite her own as the visions continued to unfold. And more a path forward not just of survival, but of renewal. The drum shows ways to protect what matters most while adapting to the changes that cannot be stopped. Standing Bear's weathered face showed cautious hope. Can such a place truly exist? And can our wounded reach it before the white men return? In answer, Nate placed both hands firmly on the spirit drum. Acting on instinct rather than knowledge, she struck it once, with open palms producing a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the very earth. To the amazement of all present, the ground beneath the wounded warriors began to shimmer with soft blue light. Where it touched them, injuries began to close, strength visibly returning to exhausted bodies. The healing power of the springs. Standing Bear whispered in astonishment. Not seen in 3 generations. Nate struck the drum a second time. The sacred spring burbled and overflowed, its banks water flowing in impossible patterns toward the burning lodges, extinguishing flames wherever it touched. A third strike, and the wind shifted, carrying away smoke and bringing the scent of distant rain. In the clearing air, Nate could see the hidden figures of women and children emerging cautiously from the hills, drawn back by some instinct they themselves likely didn't understand. The spirit drum guides those who belong to it. She explained, though the knowledge was as new to her as to those watching. It protects its people. And you, Standing Bear asked quietly, do you belong to it as well? Nate looked down at her hands, still resting on the ancient drum hands that had accidentally disturbed a sacred grave, then helped channel the power to protect it. Hands that now seemed to know instinctively how to draw forth the drum's benevolent aspects rather than its destructive potential. I think it has claimed me, she replied honestly, though I don't understand why. The old chief's eyes held generations of wisdom. Perhaps because you carry the blood of Sky Eyes taken from us long ago. Perhaps because you were already hollow inside, emptied by your experiences, disconnected from your own people's path. A vessel must be empty before it can be filled with purpose. The word struck Nate with the force of truth. She had been running for so long from an abusive father, from a society that offered women like her few options beyond marriage or servitude, from her own uncertain sense of self. She had made herself empty, rootless, connected to nothing and no one. And into that emptiness, something ancient and powerful had poured itself, finding the space it needed to be heard. Now the spirit drum cannot remain exposed. Standing Bear continued gesturing to the floating artifact. Its power is too great, too dangerous, in a world that has forgotten how to respect such forces. No. Nate agreed, the knowledge flowing into her mind from the drum's rhythms. It must be protected, hidden, but not buried again. The time for sleeping is past. The drum has awakened because it is needed. Standing Bear nodded gravely. Then you must learn the ways of the drum keeper, Natalie Harrington. Are you willing to walk that path, to stand between worlds, belonging fully to neither? The question hung in the air between them. Nate looked at the spirit drum, then at the gathering Arapaho survivors of an attack meant to annihilate them witnesses to power beyond ordinary understanding. She thought of her former life, rootless, empty, a woman disguised as a man, because the world offered her no better option. And she thought of what she had felt when the spirit drum first spoke to her belonging purpose, a connection to something vaster than herself, yet intimately tied to her own existence. "I am willing," she said finally, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "Though I have much to learn." "Then we begin now." Standing Bear replied, the faintest smile touching his lips. "The path of the drum is long, and you have taken only the first step." The days that followed brought challenges Nate could never have imagined in her previous life. Learning to properly handle and protect the spirit drum. Memorizing the sacred rhythms that could call forth its different aspects, understanding the complex relationship between the drum, the sacred spring, and the land itself, all while helping the tribe relocate to the hidden valley revealed in her vision. The journey west was arduous, especially for the wounded and elderly, but the spirit drum's influence seemed to smooth their path. Game appeared when food ran low. Water sources revealed themselves in seemingly barren landscapes, and twice they narrowly avoided patrols of white soldiers searching for hostile Indians in the aftermath of what was being called the Burial Mound Massacre in territorial newspapers. Quincy and his surviving men had spread tales of Indian witchcraft and demonic possession, with their fear-soaked accounts ironically serving to protect the Arapaho by making the burial site too feared to approach. Harrison's disappearance was blamed on savage murder, but without his organizing force and financial backing, no further expeditions were mounted to recover the spirit drum. For Nate, the phantom drums that had once tortured her now served as guides and teachers. Through them, she began to understand the true nature of the artifact. She had been chosen to protect not a weapon or a tool, but a living connection between past and present, between the physical world and the realm of spirits. "Your gift grows," Medicine Woman observed one evening 6 months into their new life in the hidden valley. They sat outside Nate's lodge, the spirit drum resting between them on a bed of sacred herbs. "But there is sadness in you still." Nate's hand stilled on the drum's surface. "I think of Drumweaver often," she admitted quietly. "She gave her life so that I might live to carry this responsibility. Yet I knew her so briefly. Sometimes I wonder if I was worth the sacrifice." "Such questions have no answers," the elderly healer replied. "Drumweaver fulfilled her purpose as she understood it. Now you must fulfill yours." "And what is that purpose exactly? To hide away with the drum forever, to keep its power secret while the white world continues to destroy everything in its path." Medicine Woman's ancient eyes held unexpected fire. "Is that what you believe the spirit drum wants? Passivity, surrender? Listen more deeply, young drum keeper. The ancestors did not choose you merely to hide their power, but to bridge worlds in conflict." The rebuke, gentle as it was, pushed Nate to more focused meditation on the drum's rhythms in the days that followed. Gradually, a clearer vision of her path emerged, not isolation, but engagement. Not merely preservation, but adaptation. The vision took physical form when a U.S. Army patrol unexpectedly discovered their hidden valley, nearly a year after the battle at the burial mound. As warriors prepared for what seemed an inevitable fight, Nate stepped forward, the spirit drum secured in a specially designed carrying case at her side. "Let me speak to them," she requested of Standing Bear. "They may listen to one of their own kind." The chief studied her face, no longer gaunt with suffering, but strong with purpose, her dual-colored eyes marking her as something beyond simple categories of race or allegiance. "You are hardly their own kind anymore," he observed. "But yes, speak. The drum has guided us this far. We will trust its choice of keeper." The colonel commanding the patrol was initially suspicious of a white woman living among hostiles. But Nate's knowledge of both worlds allowed her to navigate the dangerous conversation. She spoke of treaties signed and broken, of misunderstandings, and lost opportunities, of ways forward that need not involve bloodshed. And when words alone seemed insufficient, she drew upon the subtler powers of the spirit drum, not the dramatic control of elements that had marked its awakening, but its quieter ability to influence minds toward harmony rather than conflict. 3 days later, the patrol departed without violence, carrying maps that carefully excluded the hidden valley and reports that would describe the area as unpromising for settlement or military purposes. It was a small victory, but a significant one, proof that the drum's power could work through diplomacy as well as direct intervention. "You walk between worlds now," Standing Bear told her afterward. "Neither fully of them nor fully of us." "Is that a compliment or a criticism?" Nate asked with the directness she had learned was valued among the Arapaho. The old chief's weathered face creased in a rare smile. "It is simply truth. The bridge stands in two places at once. That is its purpose and its strength." As seasons turned to years, Nate's position evolved from reluctant vessel to respected drum keeper. The blue and amber eyes that marked her as spirit-touched earned her a new name among the tribe. Two worlds acknowledging both her mixed heritage and her unique position between cultures. Not all approved of her role, some remembered too well the broken treaties, the stolen lands, the massacred villages, to ever fully trust one with pale skin among them. But the spirit drum's clear choice and Standing Bear's unwavering support gave her a place, however tenuous. 5 years after the battle at the burial mound, as the tribe prepared for the winter solstice ceremony, a lone rider approached their carefully hidden settlement. The warrior scouts who intercepted him returned with unexpected news that the visitor was Swift Eagle, somehow alive, despite the bullet that should have ended his life. His appearance shocked the entire tribe. Thin to the point of emaciation, his once proud face now heavily scarred, he knelt before Standing Bear in the council lodge, accepting whatever judgment might come. "I should be dead," he said simply. "The white man's bullet struck me down. I felt life leaving my body. But something kept me tethered to this world. Perhaps the ancestors, unwilling to release me before I had atoned for my betrayal." He bowed his head. "I come seeking not forgiveness, which I do not deserve, but the chance to serve the people again before I truly die." Standing Bear's expression remained stern. "You led enemies to our sacred places. Many died because of your actions." "I know." Swift Eagle whispered, tears tracking down his scarred face. "Their spirits visit me each night. I offer no excuses." Nate, present as keeper of the spirit drum, studied the prodigal warrior carefully. The drum at her side emitted a subtle vibration, communicating in the silent language she had learned to interpret over the years. "The spirit drum recognizes him," she said quietly to Standing Bear. "His blood was part of the binding ritual that restored balance. In some way, he is connected to its power, as I am." The chief considered this information thoughtfully. "What do you suggest, drumkeeper?" Nate closed her eyes, briefly opening herself to the drum's guidance. "Redemption," she replied finally. "The chance to serve rather than betray. The ancestors believe his suffering has cleansed the taint of his actions." Standing Bear's decision reflected both justice and mercy. Swift Eagle would be allowed to remain, but would serve as Nate's protector and assistant bound to the spirit drum he had once endangered. His knowledge of the white world and its workings would become an asset rather than a threat. "I accept this judgment with gratitude." Swift Eagle said, his voice breaking with emotion. "My life belongs to the drum and its keeper until my final breath." The reinstatement of the disgraced warrior proved unexpectedly valuable in the years that followed. As settlements expanded and the government pushed tribes onto ever smaller reservations, Swift Eagle's understanding of white legal systems and Nate's dual heritage allowed them to navigate dangerous waters that might have swamped others. When a railroad survey team arrived in their valley 10 years after the battle, it was Swift Eagle who identified the legal loopholes that could protect their land, and Nate who used her connections with sympathetic officials to establish the area as a cultural preservation zone. A designation so new that few understood its implications, but which provided crucial protection. The spirit drum remained at the center of their strategy, not through dramatic displays of elemental power, but through its subtler influence on minds and hearts, its ability to guide its keepers toward paths of preservation and adaptation, rather than hopeless resistance or abject surrender. When Drumweaver's remains were finally discovered, 15 years after her sacrifice, emerging from a fissure reopened by spring floods near the original burial mound, Nate led the ceremony to return her to the ancestors. The spirit drum was present, its rhythms guiding the sacred songs that honored the woman who had recognized Nate's purpose before she herself understood it. She saw what I could become when I saw only what I was, Nate told Swift Eagle afterward as they watched the sunset from a ridge overlooking their valley home. Now in her late 30s, silver threading her dark hair, the years had given her a quiet confidence that complemented the power she carried. Without her, I would have remained empty. And I would have remained a traitor remembered only for betrayal. He replied, the scars on his face pulled tight by his solemn smile. The spirit drum gave us both second chances. Second chances. Nate echoed her dual-colored eyes, reflecting the fading light. Perhaps that is its greatest power, not controlling elements or healing wounds, but offering new paths when old ones lead only to destruction. On a bright autumn day, much like the one when she had first stumbled upon the burial mound, Nate stood at the edge of the sacred spring that had been carefully reconstructed in their new home. Her hair now showed distinct threads of silver, her face lined by weather and experience. Beside her stood a young Arapaho woman, barely 16, watching with solemn attention as Nate demonstrated the proper offering of tobacco. "Remember," Nate said quietly, "the drum is not just an instrument. It is a voice, the voice of the people, the voice of the earth, the voice of the ancestors. When you play it, you speak with all these voices at once." The girl, Morning Star granddaughter of Standing Bear, nodded earnestly. She had shown remarkable sensitivity to the spirit world, and the elders had agreed she should be trained in the old ways, despite the changing times. "But I'm not special," the girl said hesitantly, echoing doubts Nate herself had expressed years before. "Not like you. The ancestors never spoke through me." Nate smiled, touching the spirit drum that rested on a sacred stone between them, its surface gleaming with subtle power in the autumn light. "The ancestors speak in many ways," she replied. "Sometimes in visions, sometimes in dreams. Sometimes through the lessons passed from teacher to student across generations." She gestured toward the distant government school that some of the tribe's children now attended, learning the white man's knowledge alongside their traditional teachings. "Our world is changing. The old ways must adapt or be lost forever. That is why you are special, Morning Star, because you will carry these rhythms forward when I cannot." The irony wasn't lost on her that she, once an outsider, now worked to preserve traditions that predated her people's arrival on this continent. Yet in the strange alchemy of the spirit world, perhaps this too served a purpose. The bridge between worlds needed anchors on both shores to stand strong against the currents of change. As they completed their ceremony and prepared to return to the village, Swift Eagle approached on horseback, his scarred face serious. "Riders coming from the east," he reported. "Government men by their looks." Nate nodded calmly, no longer frightened by such visits after years of negotiating the complex relationship between their community and the expanding nation around them. "I'll meet them at the council lodge. Make sure Standing Bear is informed." As Swift Eagle rode off to deliver the message, Morning Star looked up at her mentor with worried eyes. "Will they try to take our land again or send more children to their schools? Whatever they want, we will face it, as we have faced all challenges." Nate replied, one hand resting reassuringly on the spirit drum. Not with fear or anger, but with the wisdom of both worlds. The drum will guide us, as it always has. She smiled at her young apprentice, feeling the familiar rhythm pulsing between them, seeming the heartbeat of a people who had endured, despite all efforts to erase them, who had adapted, without surrendering what mattered most. "Remember Morning Star," she said, as they walked together toward the village, the spirit drum secure in its carrying case at Nate's side. "Our strength comes not from fighting change, but from guiding it. Like water finding its path downhill, we flow around obstacles rather than breaking against them." The government delegation that awaited them at the council lodge brought unexpected news: a presidential order establishing a Bureau of Indigenous Affairs tasked with documenting and preserving Native cultures rather than erasing them. The shifting political winds had brought rare good fortune. Public sentiment had begun to recognize the value of preserving at least some aspects of Indigenous traditions before they vanished entirely. We're seeking representatives from each tribe, explained the lead official, a surprisingly young man with earnest eyes. Individuals who understand both Native ways and the workings of American government. Your community was specifically recommended by several frontier officials as a model of successful adaptation. His gaze lingered curiously on Nate's dual-colored eyes, but he asked no questions about her obvious position of authority among the Arapaho. Some things were better left unexamined by bureaucratic minds. Standing Bear, now in his 80s, but still commanding respect with every measured word, exchanged glances with Nate. They both recognized the opportunity beneath the polite invitation, a chance to influence policy at its source, to protect not just their community, but Native peoples across the continent. "We will consider your proposal," the chief replied diplomatically. "Such decisions are not made by individuals alone." After the delegation departed with promises to return in a month for their answer, the council gathered to deliberate. The debate was vigorous. Some saw opportunity in this new bureau, others suspected yet another trap in a long history of broken promises. "What does the spirit drum suggest?" Standing Bear finally asked Nate when arguments had circled without resolution. She placed her hands on the ancient artifact, closing her eyes to better receive its guidance. The rhythms that pulsed beneath her fingertips were complex but clear, showing possible futures branching from this moment, some bright with promise, others dark with continued struggle. "Participation," she said, finally opening her eyes. "Not with blind trust, but with vigilant engagement. The drum shows paths where our voice might actually be heard if we are bold enough to speak and wise enough in choosing our words." What remained unspoken was the question of who would go. The obvious choice sat before them, the woman who walked between worlds, who carried both the blood of Sky Eyes and 20 years of experience protecting Arapaho interests against encroachment. But Nate's departure would leave the spirit drum vulnerable at a critical time, unless her gaze fell on Morning Star, attentive and solemn, beyond her 16 years. The girl had shown remarkable aptitude in her training connecting with the spirit drum in ways that reminded Nate of her own early experiences. Was she ready for such responsibility? The drum's subtle vibration beneath Nate's fingers suggested the answer. "The Morning Star must complete her training," Nate announced to the surprised council. "And I must be the one to represent our interests in Washington. Swift Eagle will accompany me as advisor and protector." Shock rippled through the gathering. "The spirit drum cannot leave our territory," one elder protested. "It has never traveled beyond our boundaries." "The drum will remain here," Nate clarified, "under Morning Star's keeping with Standing Bear's guidance." The debate that followed was heated but ultimately resolved, as the elders came to understand the wisdom of having an advocate in the nation's capital during this pivotal time. Morning Star, though Young had demonstrated both the bloodline connection to the ancient drum keepers and the personal qualities needed to assume the responsibility. The night before their departure for Washington, Nate and Morning Star sat alone beside the sacred spring, the spirit drum between them. The formal transfer of guardianship would take place at dawn, but this moment was for personal truth between teacher and student. "I'm afraid," Morning Star admitted, her young face solemn in the moonlight. "What if I'm not ready? What if I fail when the people need me most?" Nate smiled gently. "Do you know what Drumweaver told me when I asked similar questions? Fear is wisdom until it becomes paralysis. Your doubt shows respect for the responsibility, which is far better than blind confidence." She placed her hand on the spirit drum, inviting Morning Star to do the same. Where their fingers touched the ancient surface, a soft glow emerged, the drum's acknowledgement of the transition taking place. "The hardest lesson I've learned," Nate continued, "is that being the drum keeper doesn't mean having all the answers. It means being humble enough to listen to the ancestors, to the earth, to the changing world around us. The spirit drum doesn't grant certainty. It offers connection. The rest is up to us." Morning Star nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "How will you manage in Washington without its guidance? Part of me will always be connected to it," Nate replied, touching the space above her heart. 20 years of listening to its rhythms have changed me in ways that distance cannot erase. Besides," she added with a hint of humor, "Swift Eagle will make sure I don't forget who I am among all those politicians." The formal ceremony at dawn was brief but profound, witnessed by the entire community. Standing Bear blessed both the departing representatives and the new keeper with ancient prayers. The spirit drum, responding to Morning Star's first official touch as its guardian, emitted a soft glow that spread to encompass the gathering, a sign of approval that brought tears to many eyes. As Nate mounted her horse for the long journey east, she felt a curious lightness despite the weight of responsibility she carried. For 20 years, her identity had been inextricably linked to the spirit drum and its power. Now she would discover who she was beyond that role. Still its voice and protector, but in a different arena, using different skills. Swift Eagle, waiting patiently on his own mount, seemed to read her thoughts. "Strange to leave after so long," he observed. "Like losing a limb, I imagine. Or gaining wings." Nate countered, surprising herself with the response. She turned for one last look at the village at Morning Star, standing proudly beside Standing Bear, the spirit drum, secure in its ceremonial case before them. "The ancestors didn't choose me just to keep the drum safe, but to help build a future where it can continue to exist in a changing world. Sometimes that means knowing when to pass the mantle." They rode eastward as the sun climbed higher toward a future neither could fully envision. Behind them, the hidden valley continued its rhythms, children playing, women working at daily tasks, men hunting and building. And at its center, the spirit drum pulsed with ancient power in new hands, its connection to the past unbroken, even as it adapted to protect an uncertain future. The work that awaited Nate in Washington proved even more challenging than she had anticipated. The Bureau of Indigenous Affairs, while well-intentioned in its founding documents, was constantly undermined by political forces more interested in westward expansion than cultural preservation. Every small victory required months of patient negotiation, strategic alliance building, and occasional leveraging of the mysterious reputation she had acquired over the years. "The woman who speaks with two voices," some officials called her, referring not just to her advocacy for both white and native interests, but to the strange dual color of her eyes that seemed to shift depending on the light. Rumors of her connection to Indian magic actually proved useful in certain negotiations, creating an uncertainty that sometimes yielded concessions where logical arguments failed. Swift Eagle proved invaluable as both bodyguard and advisor, his hard-won knowledge of white deceptive practices helping them navigate the treacherous waters of federal bureaucracy. Together, They secured protected status for several sacred sites, including the original burial mound, established educational programs that allowed native children to learn their languages alongside English, and fought successfully against the worst of the land redistribution schemes that would have further decimated tribal territories. 5 years into their Washington sojourn, word came from the Hidden Valley. Standing Bear had passed peacefully to join the ancestors, naming Morning Star as both spiritual leader and keeper of the spirit drum, the first time in tribal memory that both roles had been held by one person, let alone someone so young. The letter carried by trusted messenger included a small pouch of earth from the sacred spring. She has grown into her responsibility well, Swift Eagle observed as Nate held the pouch in her palm, a tangible connection to the home and power they had left behind. The spirit drum chose wisely. Nate nodded, feeling both pride in her student and a bittersweet awareness of time's passage. Standing Bear guided 4 generations through some of our people's darkest times. His wisdom will be sorely missed. That night, alone in her modest Washington quarters, Nate opened the pouch and placed a pinch of the sacred earth under her tongue. An old ritual drum weaver had taught her for connecting to the spirit drum across distances. The familiar rhythms flooded her consciousness immediately, not painfully as in those first encounters, but with the comfortable recognition of an old friend's voice. Through that connection, she experienced a vision of Morning Star performing the burial rites for Standing Bear, the spirit drum, guiding her through ceremonies so ancient they predated written language. She saw the Hidden Valley flourishing despite the challenges faced by indigenous communities throughout the nation. Most importantly, she saw her own path forward with new clarity, the work in Washington nearing completion, new responsibilities awaiting her return. When dawn broke, Nate summoned Swift Eagle to her quarters. "It's time to go home," she said simply. "We've accomplished what we came to do. The next phase requires us to be with our people." He nodded, unsurprised. After years as her constant companion, he had learned to recognize the particular expression she wore after communion with the distant drum. "The railroad brings us within 50 miles now. We could be home before the first snow." The return journey felt both shorter and more significant than their eastward trek 5 years earlier. America had changed visibly in that time. More settlements, more railroads, more evidence of the inexorable industrial progress that threatened everything the spirit drum represented. Yet there were also small signs of hope: preserved indigenous lands, schools teaching native languages, museums displaying artifacts with respect rather than as curiosities. As they crossed into Colorado territory, now officially a state, Swift Eagle grew increasingly vigilant. "We're being followed," he informed Nate on their 3rd night back in familiar country. "2 riders keeping their distance, but definitely tracking us. Harrison's men." Nate wondered aloud. Though the collector himself had disappeared into the earth during the battle for the spirit drum, some of his associates had survived to spread tales of Indian witchcraft and fabulous treasures. "Possible," Swift Eagle acknowledged grimly. "Or government agents worried about what we might do with the knowledge we gained in Washington." They altered their route accordingly, taking a more difficult path through mountain passes where pursuit would be obvious and easily defended against. By the time they reached the Hidden Valley 2 weeks later, no followers remained, either outwitted or perhaps never a serious threat to begin with. The welcome they received warmed Nate to her core, not just from Morning Star and the elders who had supported her unusual position as drum keeper, but from the entire community, including those who had once viewed her with suspicion. Children born after her departure stared in fascination at her dual-colored eyes, confirming the stories they had been told about the woman who walked between worlds. Morning Star had changed dramatically, no longer the uncertain girl of 16, but a confident young woman of 21, whose connection to the spirit drum had clearly deepened in Nate's absence. The sacred artifact responded visibly to her presence, its symbols glowing with subtle blue light when she approached. "You have kept it safe," Nate acknowledged during their private reunion. "And by the looks of the valley, you've guided our people well through difficult times." Morning Star smiled, the expression brightening her serious face. "I had an excellent teacher, and the drum's guidance, of course." She hesitated. "Have you come to reclaim your position as keeper?" The question held no resentment or fear, only genuine willingness to yield, if that was the ancestors' will. Nate placed her hand gently on the spirit drum, feeling its familiar rhythms, but now there was something different, a subtle redirection toward Morning Star rather than herself. "No," she replied with certainty. "You are the keeper now chosen and confirmed by the drum itself. My path lies elsewhere, though still in service to its purpose." Relief and pride mingled in the younger woman's expression. "I'm glad. The people have come to rely on my connection to the drum's guidance. But we still need your wisdom, your experience in navigating the white man's world. And you'll have it," Nate promised. "For as long as I draw breath." The role that emerged for her in the years that followed was both familiar and new. No longer the primary keeper of the spirit drum, but its ambassador to the changing world beyond their valley. She established connections with sympathetic officials, scientists, and even religious leaders who recognized the value in preserving indigenous spiritual practices. She helped create legal frameworks that protected sacred sites from development. She documented traditions that might otherwise have been lost to time, always careful to omit the most sacred details that were not meant for outside eyes. Swift Eagle remained her constant companion through these efforts, his own journey of redemption apparent in the respect he now commanded among their people. The scars on his face, once marks of shame, became symbols of transformation, physical reminders that even the deepest wounds could heal with time and purpose. On a bright autumn day, 15 years after her return from Washington, Nate stood once more at the sacred spring in their hidden valley. Her hair had turned mostly silver now, though she remained strong and clear-eyed, despite the passage of 57 winters. Beside her stood not Morning Star, who was occupied with her duties as both spiritual leader and mother to twin daughters, but a young man of mixed heritage, whose features clearly showed both native and white ancestry. The water speaks to bone, the bone speaks to drum, the drum speaks to sky. She recited, teaching him the ancient connection between elements that formed the foundation of their spiritual practice. All things connected all things in balance. The young man, Two Hawks' orphaned son of a cavalry officer and Cheyenne woman who had been taken in by the Arapaho after his parents' death, watched attentively as she demonstrated the proper offering of tobacco to the spring. "Why me?" he asked, suddenly voicing the question she had once asked herself. Why choose someone of mixed blood when there are full-blooded Arapaho who could learn these ways? Nate smiled, recognizing her own early doubts in his question. The spirit drum chooses based on heart and spirit, not blood quantum. Though, she added thoughtfully, there may be wisdom in selecting those who can walk in multiple worlds during these changing times. She studied his young face, the strong Cheyenne features inherited from his mother, the lighter skin and hair color from his father. But most striking were his eyes. One dark brown, one light blue, a natural heterochromia that the elders had immediately recognized as a sign of spiritual significance. The real question, she continued, is whether you choose this path in return. The spirit drum never forces, it invites. The decision to accept its invitation must be made freely with full understanding of both the honor and the burden involved. Two Hawks looked down at the sacred spring, its waters reflecting the afternoon sunlight in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost communicative to those who knew how to look. "I dream of drums," he admitted quietly. "Have since I was a child. Rhythms I never learned but somehow know. Is that normal?" For those the ancestors call to service, yes. Nate placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. But hearing the call doesn't obligate you to answer. You could go to the government school, learn to function fully in the white world, perhaps even use your unique position to help our people politically, as I once did. His dual-colored eyes met her amber-flecked blue ones with unexpected certainty. My place is here. My purpose is to learn what you and Morningstar can teach. The outside world holds no appeal compared to understanding the mysteries I feel all around me in this valley. Nate nodded, satisfaction warming her, despite the autumn chill. Then we begin today. The path is long, and you have many steps ahead. As they walked back toward the village, two hawks carrying the ceremonial items she could once have managed easily herself, Nate felt the familiar rhythms of the spirit drum, pulsing gently in her consciousness. Not commanding or directing now, but simply acknowledging a reminder of the unbroken circle that connected all who had come before to all who would follow. The world beyond their hidden valley continued its relentless transformation. Railroads crisscrossed landscapes that had once known only buffalo trails. Cities rose where ancient hunting grounds had sustained generations. Indigenous children were taken to distant schools and returned, if they returned at all, speaking English and wearing white men's clothes. Yet, in this one protected place, the old ways persisted, alongside careful adaptation to new realities. The spirit drum awakened from its long slumber decades ago, by Nate's accidental disturbance, continued to guide those with ears to hear its ancient rhythms. Its power, nearly unleashed for destruction by Harrison's ignorance, now served its original purpose, maintaining balance in a world constantly threatening to tip toward chaos. And at the center of it all stood the unlikely lineage of drum keepers. Morningstar, fully Arapaho by blood, but educated in both traditional and modern knowledge. Two hawks, mixed heritage orphan, whose natural gifts promised a powerful connection to the spirit world. And Nate herself, born Natalie Harrington, but transformed by decades of service into two worlds' living bridge between seemingly irreconcilable realities. On her 60th birthday, celebrated according to the white calendar she had never fully abandoned, Nate climbed alone to a high ridge overlooking the hidden valley. Her body protested the exertion more than it once had, but her mind remained sharp, her purpose clear. From this vantage point, she could see the entire community spread below lodges built in traditional style, but incorporating modern improvements, fields cultivated with techniques borrowed from both cultures, children playing games that seamlessly blended ancient and contemporary elements. Survival through adaptation, preservation through transformation. The balance the spirit drum had always sought to maintain. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her meditation. Swift Eagle, his hair now white as snow, but his back still straight despite his years, settled beside her on the rocky outcropping. After decades as companions, they had no need for constant conversation, comfortable in shared silence as they watched the life of the valley below. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked finally. "The path your life took after touching those bones, the normal existence you might have had?" Nate laughed softly. What normal existence awaited a woman alone in 1870, marriage to someone who would own me legally, spinsterhood and poverty prostitution? She shook her head. "The spirit drum didn't derail my life, Swift Eagle. It gave me one worth living." He nodded, understanding in his scarred face. "And me as well. From traitor to trusted advisor, a journey I could never have imagined that day I first told Quincy about the burial mound." His weathered hand found hers, a gesture of companionship, forged through decades of shared purpose. The ancestors are wiser than we can comprehend. Below them, the afternoon sun caught the surface of the sacred spring, as Morningstar led a ceremony beside it, the spirit drum, visible at the center of the gathering. Even at this distance, Nate could feel its subtle pulse, the rhythms that had once driven her to the edge of madness, now as familiar and necessary as her own heartbeat. The circle remains unbroken, she murmured, echoing the phrase that began and ended their most sacred ceremonies. The drum speaks on. Swift Eagle squeezed her hand gently in silent agreement as they watched the future unfold below them, a future they had helped secure against impossible odds, guided by echoes of forgotten drums that refused to be silenced by time or change or deliberate destruction. A future where ancient wisdom and modern necessity might finally find balance if those with the courage to stand between worlds continued to build bridges rather than walls. The wind shifted, carrying the distant sounds of the ceremony upward, voices raised in songs older than memory drumbeats that matched the rhythm of the earth itself. Nate closed her eyes, allowing the familiar cadence to wash over her, connecting her to all who had come before and all who would follow long after her own journey ended. This was her legacy. Not the blood that tied her distantly to Sky Eyes, not the legal protections she had helped secure in Washington, not even her years as keeper of the spirit drum, but the unbroken circle of connection and the living bridge between seemingly separate worlds that proved with each beat of the ancient drum that they had always been one world all along, waiting for those with vision to recognize the patterns binding all things together in enduring harmony.